Sounds good. Okay, good morning, everyone. On behalf of Lamar Associates Indian Country Training, we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Putting Community Policing to Work. This webinar is provided by grant number 2015-HEWXK056, awarded by the Office of Community Policing Services, U.S. Department of Justice. Let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Cindy Davis, Indian Country Training's Chief Operations Officer. But before we get started, I'd like to go through a few features of this platform to aid you in getting the full benefit of the webinar. Excuse me. At this time, please direct your attention to the text chat bar at the left of your screen. Should you have a question during the webinar, type your question at any time and send it to all presenters. Your questions will be answered in the order in which they are received. If we don't get to your question, we will during the 15-minute question and answer following the presentation. Technical difficulties. Technology is great when it works. However, if you experience technical issues and suffer a failure of connection, try calling in on your phone. But don't worry, a recorded version will be sent out post-webinar. If we lose the webinar altogether, we will reschedule. Immediately following the webinar, you will be directed to a brief survey and the technical assistance site. There you will find free online courses and resources to view and share. If there are multiple viewers participating today, please email the names and titles to info@lamarassociates.net. We kindly ask that you take a minute to complete a survey, as your comments and feedback allow us to accurately report back to the COPS office. And please note, we will email you with the link to view and share the video presentation of the webinar. The survey will be at the end of the webinar and you'll be directed to that. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker presenter today, Mr. Walter Lamar. Mr. Lamar has 30 years of specialized law enforcement and security experience, having served as a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Deputy Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Office of Law Enforcement Services, Senior Advisor to the Director of the Department of the Interior, Office of Law Enforcement and Security, and President, CEO of Lamar Associates, Indian Country Training. Recently, Mr. Lamar took a leave of absence to take a temporary assignment with the Pentagon, and we are so thrilled to have him back. Mr. Lamar is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana and a descendant of the Wichita Tribe of Oklahoma. He was raised on the Blackfeet, Wind River, Jicarilla Apache, and Navajo reservations, in addition to Oklahoma Indian Country. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Walter Lamar.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy, and welcome to you all. And we appreciate very much you joining us today for this COPS office sponsored webinar. And as Cindy mentioned, we are totally dependent upon technology, and that being the case, I think she laid it out pretty well, but I will just mention that if you have other programs running, it's usually best because this thing, because of the video and audio, does gobble up a little bit of bandwidth. So it's always a good idea to shut down other programs. And that will ensure that you hopefully stay connected with us. But as Cindy said, in worst case scenario, we are going to record this. We enjoy the chat bar feature of this particular webinar platform. And if during the presentation you end up with questions, we're going to have some time at the end of this webinar. I'm going to be presenting for, I hope, just right at an hour, provided my timing is right. And at the end of that hour, we'll look at taking some questions. You know, it's always important, I think, to take this opportunity to thank you guys for the hard work and the dedication. You know, it's so difficult the being out there on the front lines and seeing the things that you see, the crazy caseloads. and sadly, the kind of tragedy that results from some of the issues that we face in Indian country, some of the things that affect our children, some of the things that affect our elders, the tragedy that occurs on a regular basis in some of our tribal communities. So we take this opportunity to extend our thoughts and appreciation to you for your dedicated work. Cindy mentioned where I grew up. I grew up on a number of different reservations. My immediate family and relatives live and work in Indian country. So, I didn't, and this is something, and I will have to admit today is one of those days where you get a little bit, start out your day a little irritated. And I think this is one of those days, because putting these webinars together causes an awful lot of thought, and you do a lot of analysis and thought regarding our tribal communities, and sometimes you just get kind of angry, and so understand I didn't just read about Indian country issues or study them. They're issues that I've lived, and my family lives, and they're difficult for us a lot of times, and there's no way that we can affect change by ourselves. And collaborative partnerships are what I believe are key to long-term change. And like I said, I've given an awful lot of thought to this. Before we get started, though, always in our communities, we look to start off in a good way. And I'm going to ask you in your own way to offer positive thoughts, positive energy, and look to those that have gone before us. And those that came before us that offered prayer for those born and those yet unborn, and they actually offered prayers for our well-being and the well-being of our communities. So our thoughts go out to them and asking for the necessary strength, guidance, and direction to make our communities healthy and safe. So let's take one quick moment and this is a photograph of my grandmother, my dad's mother, and my grandfather, for whom I'm named, Walter Lamar. And, growing up in our tribal communities, it's evident to me and others that everyday pieces of our culture, our identity disappear. And I got to say, a key to community is identity. And we have to strive to preserve that identity, and we all know that it's harder and harder to maintain our languages and traditions in this day and age. But it truly is up to us to carry on and do the very best that we can in our humble, and as we say oftentimes, in our humble and our pitiful way. We have got to do the very best that we can to ensure that our young people understand and know what their culture is. And I got to say that social equity, and it's interesting, it's a word that I used to, or a phrase I used to use a lot, talking about creating ownership and community. And if you know your relatives will be embarrassed by something you do, there's a good chance that you may not do it. If you think no one cares and that you have no equity in the community, really, then what does it matter? Vandalism and graffiti and not respecting yourself, it doesn't really matter, because you think that maybe nobody cares. Today's webinar is the fifth and the last webinar in a series of webinars. And these webinars have what I think have served to provide focus on community-oriented policing in our tribal communities, while ensuring that we continue to discuss collaborative community partnerships. So we are talking about community policing. And Cindy and I were talking this morning that we're not really sure that there are folks, I think, that are missing out on some of these webinars because they see community policing and they're not recognizing that in reality, what that means is this collaborative community partnership. And our goal has been for each webinar to build on the webinar before, but also to give you each of these webinars that were standalone and could stand on their own. So I will say, if you haven't seen the previous webinars, go to Indian Country Training Institute. You can Google that, Indian Country Training Institute. And there you'll find the previously presented webinars. They're the recorded versions, collaborating to problem solve, building collaborative partnership, improving a collaborative partnership, and engaging youth in community policing. So those webinars will be there, and it kind of gets you caught up, if you, so to speak. And also, I'll mention at this point that we're in the process of developing, and actually we've already developed them, online courses in conjunction with the COPS office that can allow you to explore these topics in the comfort of your office, the comfort of your home, and give you the opportunity to spend all the time you need to truly research and understand the issues that are going to be presented in these online training courses. So we're excited about those. And we'll be working with the COPS office to get them up on a platform. Okay, that scared me for a second because the slides look like they might not advance for me. I'm going to deviate just for a second here. This was on my mind this morning, and I was on Facebook, and I will tell you that Facebook is where I go to mind everybody else's business. So it's maybe it's a perfect platform for Indian Country because we do like to mind each other's business. And as I would maybe suggest, that it's the Moccasin Telegraph and the automated version of the Moccasin Telegraph. So I was actually looking at pictures of my beautiful grandbaby when I noticed what her mother, Kayla Gillum, who lives on the Blackfeet Reservation, had written. And I want to read to you what she wrote because I think it's important. She wrote, and I quote, "There is a reason the slogan says not even once. Of course, at first it's a choice, but it turns into a disease that only 6% of the users can escape from. It will take everything you love away. It will turn you into something you never dreamed of. My brother came from a 2-parent home who both worked hard for a living. We all lived a comfortable life. He is super smart, went to the right college from high school, and graduated with a bachelor's in sociology. He had a good paying job, a family, kids, a home. That's where his addiction started, alcohol, then progressed to cocaine. Then his marriage fell apart, and to deal with the depression, he turned to meth. It made the hurt go away, but before he knew it, he couldn't escape. He lost everything, including the respect of many. He began to do what addicts do to get his drug, burning more bridges in the process, breaking more laws, and landing in jail numerous times. Well, the law won. This last possession charge might be what saves his life. He has a year to think long and hard if his path is how he wants to continue once he's out. I sure hope to get my big brother back. No matter what he's done, we still love him. I still have hope, even when there are folks out there rolling their eyes saying he will never change. You don't understand this drug. It rips your soul out and takes over your life. When you see the slogan, not even once, for the love of God, family, children, and yourself, say no." Her grandfather and father were both in law enforcement. She works at a recovery center, and yet they couldn't reach this young man and pull him from this dark, deep hole. And that's where our frustration lies. That's where the frustration is. And early on, we were talking about prescription drug diversion and the difficulties that creates in our communities, and that they're the gateway to heroin. And while I was out doing presentations and doing webinars and putting training together, during that very time, I had immediate family members that were addicted to prescription drugs. And yet here I am out trying to tell people how to address it, or offering presentations suggesting ways to address the issue, when yet I couldn't reach an immediate family member. So these are the things that we struggle with. These are the things that we want to address. In this presentation today on community policing and putting it to work, I hope will offer some idea of some of the things that we can do in our community, and we can do in our positions. So in our very first webinar, and I mentioned that collaborating to problem solve, we talked about the basic elements of community policing, and the definition is here on the slide. I'm not going to bother to read it to you. And I know that the definition sounds a little complicated, but in reality, community policing is at its foundation police and community working together to save lives, prevent crime, and solve crime. And a prime example of community policing is always the example that's used as a cop walking the beat. Stopping to say hello to folks, checking on businesses, knowing everybody's name, knowing when something is out of the ordinary or someone is out of place. Completely familiar with all aspects of the community on their beat. Now we know that's more conducive to urban, to cities where you have cops on a beat. But in our communities, that doesn't mean that we can't get closer to our officers, that we can't create that same kind of ideal. But I will say, in our tribal societies, for time immemorial, we had traditional ways of ensuring peaceful order. And, it wasn't policing per se, but a form of authority to see that community expectations and norms were followed. And you know what? Our traditional ways, as it turns out, are representative of true community policing. But today, police in Indian country, they function within a complicated jurisdictional web, and that those of you on the front line recognize how complex that can be at times, and often answer to multiple authorities. They might operate without a strategic direction from the tribal government. And as a result, there's a lack of a sense of partnership within the community. So history has created an inherent mistrust of law enforcement in Indian country. And I truly believe that we can attribute that to the beginnings of what we'd call law enforcement in Indian country. And its beginnings were in military and Indian agent control, okay? And this wasn't for the purpose of ensuring a safe community, a peaceful community, but it was an effort to force our ancestors into submission, to keep them corralled and controlled. Well, you know what? Control equals force, typically, and therefore, Indian country law enforcement has long been associated with control, and it places our police officers as perceived adversaries. Every day, Native police officers have been sometimes looked at as those early day Native police officers and turncoats, traders, and so on. Well, this negative perception is filtered down through the generations, and we oftentimes talk about generational trauma, but we have learned behaviors through the generations and learned emotion. And at some level, I believe it still persists today, this distrust, mistrust of law enforcement in our communities. Well, many of our communities have limited police resources, so we end up seeing officers speeding. They're just speeding by on the way to the next call for service. They're racing from call to call. Well, trust me, that makes it hard, if not impossible, to engage in community policing activity, which by its nature is proactive and engenders trust of the community. Okay, so, well then, what is the answer? And I've said this in each of the previous webinars. collaborative community partnerships. And even when I say it, it's like, really, isn't there a better way to describe this? Well, probably is, but collaboration, okay, working together within our community and creating partnerships. It's communication. Well, partnership actually it involves more than one person every time. And preferably we, or I guess I should say, you already have in your community some kind of a partnership, a collaborative working group, no matter what form that's in, that you have some kind of a service providers group or a grassroots group. If not, that you listening on this webinar today will be that leadership that creates such a group and brings together health services, tribal courts, housing authority, tribal leadership, business, educators, environmental health, treatment, social services, behavioral health, and youth, talk about that in a minute, along with police in a partnership. And a partnership, as I said, being a group working together for the identified purpose of problem solving. Okay, that's why we're getting together, is problem solving, ensuring police are included in this partnership. I mean, we are talking about community policing, but I don't want it to be the entire focus. So as we create these working groups, absolutely we want law enforcement to be a part of it. And we want to create an environment conducive to this strong community policing effort. Looking back to our traditional ways as well. And this is also an opportunity to help the police transition from a strictly reactive posture to a proactive, collaborative posture. So bear with me a second. I'm going to divert to, because our goal is to combine expertise and resources of multiple professionals and agencies to improve intervention action for the safety of our community. Collaboration is an offshoot of partnership. Partnerships collaborate on problem solving. In building relationships of trust, partners have an equal say in offering ideas about how things need to be done. Ideas are taken seriously in a true partnership. And the partners collaborate on this course of action that's agreed upon by all. In this way, partners are responsible for what's done. So now I'm going to deviate here for a second. Networking, knowing and communicating with those in the community to exchange information and coordinate resources, that's going to be key to collaborative community partnerships. So I'm going all the way back here to networking. We can understand networking because we all have a network in which we operate. Our friends, our colleagues, our workmates, we have a network, and that's going to be the very basis of this networking, coordination, cooperation, and then the key, collaboration. We've actually, and I just mentioned a minute ago about including youth in our community partnerships. Engaging youth was one of the topics of our previous webinars in this series. And I said then, and I'll say it again, who is more informed of the day-to-day happenings in our communities? Who understands some of the issues up close and personal? Because sadly, in some cases, they've been the victims of the very crimes that we're looking to address. Who do we look to for the ability to examine some of these issues with fresh eyes, with that youthful enthusiasm, and we got to say, because they're also completely familiar with today's technology, they're able to quickly communicate with a lot of folks through social media. Actually, some of us old folks can do that as well, but I think they can. They're so adept at it, and they understand exactly how that works and what it means, and being able to gather information and disperse information. But they do present an incredible resource only if we recognize that they are that resource. So it's important to talk about advancing community policing objectives by involving our youth. But I got to tell you, in the same breath, when we're talking about this tremendous resource, we also have to talk about our at-risk youth. And what we can do as a community, provide a safety net for those most at risk. The Tribal Law and Order Act established a commission to study public safety issues in Indian country. And in this final report was a statement that said federal and state juvenile justice systems take Indian children who are the least well and make them the most incarcerated. The least well, the most incarcerated. So our young people have to be included in every aspect of community problem solving. Okay, so now I want to jump back to this community policing definition and reference a major component of community policing, and that would be, as I said, problem solving. Okay, so now we've covered this in every previous webinar, but again, I want to touch on it as a reminder. The SARA model is what we recommend as the go-to problem-solving process for our collaborative community partnerships. So folks come together to solve problems afflicting the community, that they have a process, that you have a process to use. And this is actually what the Department of Justice Cops Office recommends and promotes, is the SARA model. And SARA stands for scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. Scanning is, and we're going to continue to talk about this, but scanning is problem identification and prioritization. What is the problem and in what order do we want to address it? Analysis, understanding the problem and the effects that it's going to have on our community. Breaking it down piece by piece so we're able to develop a clear understanding of the issue. And then we got to have a response, and that's enacting the necessary steps to resolve the issue. And then lastly, as we do in virtually every component of business, is we have an assessment. How are we doing phase? How did we do phase of the process? So to address a problem, complex or simple, there's always a process. So yeah, I'm just going to use real quickly an example. Your car broke down. There's a friend of mine, every time I'd ask him, he's a Comanche guy, I'd say, how you doing, man? He'd say, I'm busier than a pair of jumper cables at a powwow. Thump. Anyway, sorry about that. So your car won't start. Well, trust me, that is a problem. Problem identification, in this case, pretty simple. The car won't start. Then we go to problem analysis. The engine turns over, so it's not the battery. Just gas it up, so it's not fuel. Problem response. So I'm going to call my brother-in-law, who's a mechanic. Brother-in-law ends up getting it started. Fuel filter was clogged up. Problem assessment. It was the right thing to do to call my brother-in-law. Everything turned out good. He got it started. But I am going to put a calendar entry to make sure that I have that fuel filter checked at the recommended intervals. And then I continue to monitor how the car runs to make sure there are no other problems. And if a problem does occur, I start this process all over again. Scan, analysis, response, and then assess. Pretty simple. So then if it's so simple, why do I continue to ramble on about it? Well, I guess that's just how I am, right? collaborative community partnership, in simple terms, is just a group of people, right? Just a group of people that are brought together to address a community problem. Sadly, because of the problems that we face in today's Indian country, the problems are oftentimes multi-layered, multifaceted, and they require a multi-departmental response. Okay, it's not as simple as a car broke down. Well, the SARA model is the process to organize the problem-solving initiative. And ideally, the group that we've brought together is representative of a cross-section of service providers and community members so that we can offer that broad-based resource to address the problem. And you know what? We know there are a number of ways to organize groups. Executive committees, working groups, subcommittees, and so on. So this organization that we're going to put together, or that is put together in our community, we have to recognize that, well, first of all, the size of the group, the availability of the participants, and the scope of the problems that we're looking to address are going to dictate how this group is going to be organized. But it does have to be organized. So I'm going to ask you to visualize, if you will, for a second, that the crime problems in your community and the impact that it has on the people of your community. Visualize community policing. Try to visualize community policing and partnership and what that should look like in your community. Visualize what that looks like in your community. Well, San Felipe Pueblo, that's where my wife is from, they have different issues and needs than do the Blackfeet Reservation where I'm from. Leech Lake and Gila River, like all tribes, they experience similar crime-related issues, but with different dynamics. Blackfeet, sadly, referring back to what I opened with and that Facebook post, is experiencing a meth epidemic, while Puyallup is dealing with heroin and prescription drug diversion. Now, they're both drug problems, so we got a similar issue, but as you know and I know, there are different dynamics attached to each. Meth, well, that could be produced shake and bake right there in the tribal community, while heroin is definitely going to be imported. Different dynamics, different dangers, similar in devastation to the community. Well, how can we positively impact the root crime in our community by implementing community partnerships? Well, making sure that when we have these community partnerships that we are including a problem-solving process. So let me say this, we have no secret sauce. We have no secret sauce to immediately address problems in your community. So you're not going to be able to walk away from this webinar saying, oh, here's the secret sauce. We don't pretend to have any special insight, but rather continue to promote a very simple message. Collaborative community partnership equals talking to each other with respect and agreeing to continue and sustain partnership and collaboration for the good of all. And, you know, I talk about these groups, bringing together groups, but it's also important to understand that in a partnership, it could be just the chief of tribal police meeting with the director of social services every Thursday for coffee. Let's get together at 9 o'clock every Thursday for coffee. Trust me, their conversation will gravitate towards common issues that relate to their work. And that's going to translate to community problems, right? Gradually, their conversation is going to end up involving housing, and they say, you know what, let's invite the housing authority director to join us for coffee. That moves the conversation into then additional layers. Just because there's not a formal process or organization put in place, that doesn't mean that problem solving and communication isn't occurring. It is. Okay, let me, this is kind of off topic a little bit. you know what? I got to say, I'm not a big believer in Indian country wide statistics. We see these things over and over, and it's like these wow kind of statistics, like, oh my gosh, there's this many of these, there's this many of those, that it's twice as prevalent here, it's three times as this, and it's, you know, I'm not a believer in those statistics because typically I don't believe them to be particularly accurate, nor am I convinced of their validity. So I always say we've got to be very careful about getting wrapped up in these broad statistics because sometimes it only adds to the fog. Tribal leadership goes to a national meeting and they hear these statistics and they get wrapped around the axle about these particular statistics. Well, I mentioned earlier the Moccasin Telegraph. That just simply means there are not many secrets in our communities. There are not many secrets in our communities. And it turns out, so that puts you in a position of being the best bellwether of determining the depth and scope of problems in your community. And I'm not suggesting at all that that would be by yourself, but with others from the community. And this is where local statistics, arrests, hospital visits, treatment referrals, crime rates, social service cases, and so on, can assist in the local assessment of a problem, okay? Because of that transparency, that there are no secrets in Indian country and our tribal communities, that we see what that problem is, and then we're able to look at these statistics, local statistics, to better understand it. But I will say that it's critical for service providers to come to a consensus as to the depth and scope of a community problem. And I got to tell you, I've heard this so many times. Yeah, you know what, we have a problem, but yeah, it's not really that big of an issue. Heard it with gangs. Oh yeah, they're just wannabes. Oh, you know, well, there's some heroin here, but it's not really that big a deal. Well, you know, we do have some meth, but you know, I don't think it's really that big of an issue. I got to tell you, I've seen this over and over, problem denial, and it's something we in Indian country can be pretty good at times. Well, a key step in problem solving is securing buy-in from tribal leadership. We want to get buy-in from tribal leadership, and that means building a strong consensus among community service providers regarding an identified problem. And we have a consensus, and we say, yes, indeed, this is a significant problem in our community, and here's why it is. So I'm hoping that you are asking yourself right at this point, does my community have an active working group? Have there been attempts to establish these groups? And if there were, what were the reasons they succeeded or failed? If there are no such groups, why is that? Why don't we have these groups in our communities? So what obstacles are there to forming community collaborative partnerships? Okay, they keep saying that word over and over when I could just say, why don't we have any working groups? But I like those words of collaboration, community, and partnership. Well, you know what? I think you know and I know that there are a gazillion reasons and excuses and rationale for not bringing together a collaborative community partnership. I don't have the time. My God, I got cases stacked this high on my desk. I don't have the time to be messing around with more meetings. We already have too many meetings. You know what? Every time we've had a group, law enforcement always tries to take everything over. Next thing you know, it becomes their deal, and they try to take all the credit for whatever we do. No one ever follows through. We have these meetings, no one ever follows through. After a little while, folks just quit showing up, or they show up and they're on their phone the whole time, not paying any attention. So many things we can't talk about because of confidentiality. Oh, we can't talk about things that might compromise an investigation. Well, I got to tell you, and you know this, there are plenty of reasons not to do it, but we have to do it. We simply cannot allow some of the problems we face to continue in our communities. I mean, it's just thinking about that Facebook post that I read earlier. I mean, it's just the devastation that is created in one family. So right here in the hub of this wheel, the primary tool to upend this negative dynamic, it's trust. Such a simple word, such a tough task. How do we create trust? How do we maintain trust? That's where, trust me, the heavy lift comes in. Trust is very fragile in our communities. One false rumor can demolish the trust of an entire group. And I got to tell you, you know and I know the rumor mill in Indian country. So we've got to develop strategies to negate those dysfunctional dynamics that stymie our community growth. And I'll talk about Facebook earlier and minding everybody else's business. All you got to do is find a tribal Facebook page, anything that's doing with something with the tribe, and you will find the nastiest things that we can say to each other, the nastiest verbiage contained on these Facebook pages. It's incredible. Sometimes it just absolutely seems to me that no one can be meaner to us than us. So here we are. Let's talk about putting community policing to work. Okay, what does that look like? Many of our tribal communities are experiencing crime related to methamphetamines. Okay, I mentioned that earlier in that Facebook post. So it's important to understand some of our tribal communities. In some cases, because I do want to talk a little bit about meth, and I want to use it as an example for problem solving. But some of our communities haven't seen any meth at all. Some have seen some isolated cases. Some have identified it as a problem, and some of our communities are engaged in full-fledged meth epidemic. And what is an epidemic? That it's widespread, prevalent, and rapidly spreading. So for purposes of this exercise, I want to consider that meth is, let's just say meth is at epidemic proportions in your community, and that there isn't a collaborative community partnership active. So basically, you, are starting from scratch. And I don't believe that's an unrealistic scenario. I've been to a lot of tribal communities where there are absolutely no working groups and there are no groups working to collectively solve some of these issues that we face. Guess what? The first step always requires that one person, setting up and organizing an effort. And here at Indian Country Training Institute, we like to say, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. How many times have you heard, oh my God, heroin in our community, it's at epidemic proportions. It's out of control. It's devastating our community. When is someone going to do something? Oh, the meth has gone crazy in our community. When is someone going to do something? We're losing so many young adults to alcohol-related traffic fatalities. When is someone going to do something? Well, it's our contention that each of us are the ones we've been waiting for. So look in the mirror. You are the one. So if that's the case, then where do we start? What's the starting point? Our community, we've lost teenagers to suicide. There's a young man beaten to death at an underage house party. The tribal convenience store is experiencing significant losses due to shoplifting. The foster care system can't find foster homes. Truancy is at an all-time high. People can't leave their home due to the high incident burglary. Holy smokes. Well, trust me, I know these, looking at this broad spectrum of issues and problems in our community can be entirely overwhelming and stop us in our tracks. Where do we start? Well, we've got to recognize that there are many problems that face our communities, and a lot of these problems are interrelated, intertwined. Address one problem, and we're likely to positively affect others. So let's go back to creating a group. Think about coworkers, colleagues, friends, relatives, tribal leaders, maybe the news media, because they have broad influence, business community, clergy, tribal tribal leaders, I think I might have mentioned that, traditional spiritual leaders, and educators. Make a list of 5 people or less that you believe are respected, well thought of, and known in the community. Okay? Set a meeting with each person on your list and invite them to coffee or lunch in an informal setting. And you know what? I don't like to call this an interview, but really at the end of the day, it's an interview because you're going to be interviewing them. You want to get a feel for what motivates them, their level of interest in making a difference in a community, their ability to lead or follow, their organizational skills, their communication skills, their knowledge of culture and tradition, and get an idea of their work ethic and their skills bank. So what's a skills bank? Hobbies, things that folks excel at, that maybe they're a police officer, but they are a bike enthusiast, a bow hunter, all these different skills banks, because it's important to know what kind of skills they possess, because we might be able to use them and might need them. Invite at least 3 of these people after you've done your informal interviews, and preferably you'll be able to invite all 5 to a slightly more formal meeting at your office or at the community center or tribal office where you can sit around a table with the ability to take notes. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of a grassroots organization to build a community group from scratch, developing new leadership where none existed, and organizing the unorganized. It's a values-based process where people are going to be brought together to act in the interest and in the best interest of the community and the common good. So what's going to go on at this meeting? We're going to bring an organized approach to the meeting, an agenda and a purpose. You know, I got to tell you, Native folks were pretty good at being social and visiting and gabbing, and quickly these things can turn into a gab fest with nothing getting accomplished. So outline what you want to happen and what you want to get done. And we got to answer a couple of questions. Is a community action group necessary? Do we want a larger group, which I think is always better? Do we want to formalize the effort? Then the group must decide an organizational makeup. We talked about that earlier, about what that organization is going to look like. Draft a guiding document to outline a structure. And when you know what now, we got to start drafting stuff. All you got to do is go online, conduct an internet search, and research to find options. Organizational structures for community groups, they're all over the place. You can just take one off, cut and paste, create this organizational structure, the outline, this guiding document. And then be prepared to present a couple of options to the group, what they think this should look like. And now you've already got basically the organizational framework already set. And then you got to decide interim leadership. There always has to be a leader. There always has to be a leader. You may be the one that we've been waiting for. You may be the one that are organizing this. You may not necessarily be the person who's going to be the leader. Consider finding some funding. Now, that's not always necessary, but I got to tell you, it could be helpful. So put that in the back of your mind for consideration. And that could be from the business community, the tribe. If you have gaming, it could be from gaming. And then lastly, start pulling together the strategy. You're not going to have this from the first meeting, but you got to start thinking about pulling it together. And of course, my suggestion is going to be include the problem-solving model that we've talked about. Sarah, what are the long-term and short-term goals of this effort? What are your organizational strengths and weaknesses? Maybe a weakness has been we've tried this several other times and it didn't work. But the strength is that we're at it again, and we're going to make sure that it works this time. Who cares about these community problems? Well, hopefully you've brought together the people who do, and they will be able to identify more people. Who are potential allies for this effort? Well, we're hoping that it's going to be someone in tribal leadership, right? Because that's where a lot of the influence in our communities is going to come from. Who has the power and authority to provide resources? There we go, talking maybe about tribal leadership. how can we make our work enjoyable and rewarding for participants to be a part of? Isn't that going to be a whole lot easier to get folks there if it's something where there actually is a reward at the end of the day? So we've got to build the organization strategy in a logical manner. People like to, we like to look at ourselves as being reasonable. So the organizers, you, should develop a strategy that is basically an escalation of activity that makes sense, that's reasonable, so that neither members of the group nor the larger communities see what's being done as overblown or reactionary. Because guess what? Yeah, we're gonna hear that. But we got to make sure that it's not that. Determine those interested and motivated to move ahead with this collaborative community partnership, and then for you, if appropriate, you want to turn that leadership role over to another. But make sure this is going to be part of what you want to do. Make sure there's a list of to-dos and follow-up, because if there's no accountability and we sit around, we have a gab fest, we dream up all these things, and there's not a to-do list and accountability when those things are to be done by, it ain't going to get done. Make sure that we have a follow-up meeting and it's not too far in the future so that we don't lose momentum. Guess what? We've driven a stake in the ground, and that's the positive step forward. Is driving that stake in the ground and showing that we've done something. It makes for momentum. It makes for that movement ahead. So for the purposes, as I've said, and I'm going to have to hurry this up, but for the purpose of this particular exercise, we want to say that meth is our problem. And so when we look at meth, we say, what are the reasons for using meth? What could be peer pressure? Could be experimentation. And it could be judgment, and impaired judgment. Maybe somebody got drunk and someone's saying, hey, you're at a party, try this, this is all right, it's okay. That's just a lack of awareness and understanding of the dangers, right? That's something that we can step up and we can work to fully educate potential users to influence their decision making. And I got to tell you, that strategy worked because there was a real downturn in young people starting to use meth. So that does work, and it has worked in communities. Hopefully that we can use that as keeping folks from the list of addicted. And this is going to apply to a number of similar issues, a campaign built on education awareness. We know that that's important and it's helpful. But we also know in our communities that we have potential users in our communities that are wallowing in hopelessness. They're wallowing in hopelessness. And you, better than most, know exactly what that means. Our relatives that are willing to do almost anything for a temporary escape from reality. Imagine the mental anguish of a young person who they cut themselves to inflict physical pain in an effort to distract from the mental pain. Do we think for a second that education and awareness is going to have any kind of influence on folks that are experiencing that kind of pain? They're looking for any form of escape. So now we're talking about a deeply rooted issue that requires significant intervention, which equals significant investment of resources. Trust me, being able to address that hopelessness in our communities and that underlying reason for a lot of the problems that we face, it's not going to be easy at all, but we have to reach down and address that root cause. So meth, as we know, it's got complex chemical names and makeup, big, hard to pronounce chemical names. It's a central nervous stimulant. In early days, it was used to energize war fighters. We know a lot about meth. We know it's an aphrodisiac and euphoriant. We know mostly what those signs and symptoms are. We know the consequence. We know what it does to our communities. And I will say this, that our communities, as I said earlier, are transparent because of the Moxon Telegraph, because we like to mind each other's business. And I always say that drug dealers, they're hiding out in the open. We know who they are. So that always begs a question is, if we know who they are, how in the hell is it that they're still dealing drugs in our communities? So what we have to do is we've got to be able to take this problem and we've got to distill it down into digestible bites because of all these complexities that surround meth. So now we have a group formed because you formed it. And we're going to incorporate the SARA model because we recognize that's a good problem-solving model. And we're going to initiate problem identification and prioritization. So now we've got this group sitting around a table, and as I said, it could either be a party or a working group. We want it to be a working group, so there's got to be a mechanism to ensure that order and process. You've already put together kind of an organizational outline. So we're going to examine all these problems that are in our community, and we're going to prioritize them. And in this particular case, because we've decided that meth is it, meth is going to be a priority. So because we cannot address every problem simultaneously in our communities, we have to pick our battle and pick the battle front. And in this case, we're talking it's going to be meth. We start with this problem-solving process. We've now prioritized meth. We're going to look at all these local statistics, and we're going to look at arrest, treatment referrals, court statistics, all those things I mentioned earlier. And we're going to create this overall understanding. Where is the drug coming from? Is it imported or is it being produced locally? For the locally produced, where are the precursors coming from? Where are these ingredients coming from? Who's producing, who's selling? And I mentioned earlier that and I always say it over and over, that there's few secrets. So these guys are hiding out in the open. We know who the hell they are. We know what they're doing. We know how this is affecting our community. Imagine this, for one of the tribes in the country, at one point, a tribal official testified before Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, said that 30% of their tribal employees tested positive for meth use. That's just insane. So when we have these limited resources that a lot of us do, part of our analysis could look at, because it's important to recognize how much is this costing our community to deal with meth or whatever any problem is. We've got to figure out what the cost is, because it's incredible when you break it down and look at the finances, the monetary cost of what meth is costing us in our communities, heroin, and so on, because it's a drain on every one of our services. So we're going to take this as a step-by-step, and I know that I'm already coming up on the top of the hour, so I'm going to try to hustle through here because we've already kind of talked about this. And the scanning part of this thing, I mean, it really is just as simple as saying, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? What are the consequences to the community? We're going to prioritize it. We're going to create some broad goals. What would broad goals look like? How about maybe we're going to, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to educate, create awareness. We're going to expand treatment options, and we're going to identify law enforcement options. So those are going to be kind of the broad goals as we start looking at this issue. We go to the analysis. What's known about the problem? Well, that's going to come from those statistics that we talked about, creating some qualitative and quantitative data that's going to support this. And we're going to use as much information as we can find across the board. And we know that that meth, that there's hospital visits that are associated with it. There's treatment referrals. There's labs. There's chemical dumps, chemical cleanups, burglaries, robberies, child neglect, abandoned children, elder abuse, shoplifting. I mean, it just goes on and on. The problems that surround this problem of methamphetamine addiction. And at this point during the analysis phase, there may be an opportunity to call the Department of Justice and say, hey, can you send out an expert to help us to sit down and look at it? I really like these ideas of seminars where you're bringing together the top experts in these particular arenas, bringing them in and having a sit down, and you put this brainstorming together from these top experts. In this case, it might even be the local DEA, FBI, or ATF. And response is going to be that kind of that brainstorming. And we're going to be looking at why do we so often we want to reinvent the wheel? We want to start from scratch, or we want to start a big study, or we want to do this whole big document when in fact somebody else has probably already done it. So let's find where the wheel has been invented and adopt it and adapt it to our particular community and our issue and use that. So now we're going to choose from these interventions, and we're going to outline a response, and we're going to assign responsible parties. That means we're going to assign roles. Who's going to do what, by when? Supply and demand. That's what, when you start looking at drugs, there's going to be a supply and demand. So we want to identify the dealers, producers. We want to initiate investigations. We want to look for ways to be able to take these guys off. We want to identify users and make arrests for possessions, not to lock folks up, because we know we're not going to arrest our way out of this, but to get these folks in treatment. If you can work on identifying users and getting them into treatment, or sadly, in some cases, we may have to get them locked up, it's going to stunt the supply, or it's going to stunt the demand. We're going to stunt the demand. And if you stunt the demand, then those folks who are supplying, that dwindling demand, this active law enforcement response, is going to diminish their profit. They're motivated by profit, and it's going to inhibit these folks working to produce and sell in our tribal communities. They're going to move on to a safer haven. They're going to go somewhere else. So we then look at creating this opportunity of diminishing the supply and attacking the dealers and producers, and then we're going to move them off the reservation. In some cases, tribes have actually adopted ordinances to banish folks. So, if someone's going to continue to do that in a community, they're going to get banished. They're not allowed to come back onto the reservation. Then lastly, we go to the assessment phase. Okay, in the assessment phase, was the plan that we came up with, the strategy, properly implemented? And then we're going to monitor statistics to determine what effect we've had. Well, we're going to know that arrests are going to go up. So that's not going to be one of the statistics we're going to look at and say if the arrests should be going down on the front end. They're going to go up on the front end, we hope. Convictions should also go up. So tribal courts are going to show us convictions going up. The FBI is going to show us that convictions are going up in federal court. Treatment referrals should go up because we want to do what? We want to diminish that demand. We want to diminish the demand. Burglaries should go down because the users are going to be in treatment or locked up. Crimes associated with meth use should go down. Okay, all these crimes associated with meth use should be going down. So that's what we're going to monitor, what we're going to be looking for. Then we're going to ask ourselves, are we on track with our goals? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Do we need to make adjustments to the strategy or plan? Are there parts of this plan that just aren't working and we've got to make adjustments? Are there things that we didn't anticipate? We've got to make adjustments. We adjust the goals, perhaps. How are we doing overall? We've got to continuously look at this. How are we doing overall? And conduct this ongoing assessment to ensure effectiveness. Here and I'm already at the top of the hour, past the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap it up. But we're talking about meth. But you know what? That I hope that you can see that no matter what the problem is in your community policing and this community, this collaborative community partnership can work. And it can work because we're creating this common vision. We're creating a common vision to address a problem in our community using a process and using a group of people. Nobody can do this by themselves. Trust me, nobody can do it by themselves. And I like this slide because it's it's like a Norman Rockwell scene, right? And it's at Salt River. They're community policing. There's coffee with a cop. So you go sit down with a cop and you have coffee and you visit. You talk about issues in the community and so on. They also expanded that to Pop with a Cop, where you have a child that young people get to go sit down with a cop, get to know them, get familiar with the uniform. That's what our partnership is going to look like, who it's going to include. who we want to bring to the table. Okay, so I'm past the top of the hour by 5 minutes, and I'm going to quit talking. Hopefully, this is giving you some ideas, some thought about this community policing and collaborative community partnerships, and using and breaking down the silos. And now I've gotten off on this a little bit, but the silos, that's where we're comfortable working in our own programs with colleagues with like educational backgrounds, with like interests, and we talk the same language, and then we say, oh yeah, those guys in law enforcement, yeah, they're, they just cause us more work. Oh, we've got to break those silos down, break those walls down, and start communicating. And that's what this is all about, is simply communicating with others in the community to create that common vision I talked about. So if there are any questions, and I didn't see anything come up in the chat bar. Cindy, tell me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to take that as not having. Okay, there was a question about the resources and finding these resources. Google the Department of Justice Cops Office, because it's actually amazing, because they've put out so many grants, and there's so many folks that have written these pop guides, they've written reports, and there is where that information came on Salt River, promising practices in tribal community policing. That's promising practices in tribal community policing. That's a report that was done by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and it gave some examples of community policing initiatives that a number of tribes have actually engaged, that have taken them from organization through implementation. So that's a good document to read, Promising Practices in Tribal Community Policing. And it talks about the SARA model, it talks about things that we've talked about today. There is a whole host of resources there at the COPS office, Department of Justice COPS office. And I mean, it goes through all the things that we've talked about today. But the last thing that I'll say about that, about the resources, is recognizing what the resources that we have in our very own communities, because we talk over and over about lack of money, so we have a lack of funding, we have limited housing, so we can't attract employees to come move into the community because there's this limited housing. There's all these reasons that we say we're very limited and we've got this limited resource. In reality, we're rich in resources in Indian country. We're rich in resources because we have traditional spiritual leaders, we have our tribal elders, we have people in the community who are incredibly educated, we have people in the community with experience, we have youth, and imagine, where did the youth gather? Well, there's Unity, the organization, and they come together for meetings in a lot of our tribal communities. There's the school student council. The student council, have we ever thought about talking to the student council and getting ideas from them and visiting with them? What an incredible resource they are. And then the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. There's all these resources in our communities that we have to draw on, because trust me, we think we got limited funding right now and limited resources. Looking at the horizon, those things are going to get tougher as we move along with this. Things are going to get tougher. I'm not going to go, I guess I won't go there with that, but we've got to be turning inward and looking at how we can address these things in our communities. So with that, Cindy, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up. And again, I'll thank you for joining us. And we'll wish each of you a great day, and we'll look forward to hearing about these community partnerships that you have started, that you created, because you're the ones we've been waiting for.
Thank you, Walter. As a reminder to conclude, we will email all of you with us today any unaddressed questions. Looks like Walt has been able to answer those questions, but that said, if any questions come to mind post-webinar, feel free to email us at info@lamarassociates.net. Also, watch for our newsletter to view and share today's presentation. Please be sure to complete the survey that you will be directed to immediately following the end of this broadcast. We do thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Thank you so much and have a blessed day.